Here's a segment from a recent Gun Talk radio episode. You can listen to all the Gun Talk radio podcasts however you tune in, or check out guntalk.com for more. A bunch of my friends where I kind of conned in to come in here, and let's talk about the old days, the new days, and as we look forward, what are we looking at as we go forward? First person on my list, and he's a fellow who, whether you really know his work or not, he has been influential in the last half century when it comes to firearms used for self-defense, and that entire area of study. Joined right now by Massad Ayoob. Mas, how are you, sir?
Doing pretty good for an old guy, Tom. How are you?
There you go. I mean, you have been doing this you've been a writer. You are a writer. You've been an instructor, been a competitive shooter. You've been an expert witness. You have testified, about guns and self-defense. And for me, at least my entry into what you do was with it may have been your first book, I don't know, In the Gravest Extreme, the first book I was aware of that really talked about using a firearm for personal protection. When did that book come out?
That came out in 1980, Tom. It was my second book and my first one on deadly force. In 2014, we brought out an updated version, Deadly Force, from Gun Digest Books, and the more updated second edition just came out the last month or so.
Yeah, and that's a very good one, Deadly Force. I guess let's do this. Let me let you explain your background and how you got into this, because that would help us get started.
Sure. Cop for 43 years, fully sworn, working part-time. Police firearms instructor since 1972 and training private citizens since 1981. 43 years now as an expert witness for the courts, so there's been different hats worn. Still doing everything except the police work. I retired from that 5 years ago, and I looked in the mirror and saw somebody too old to run to the sound of the guns anymore.
Well, yeah, you certainly don't want to go hands-on with some of these young guys who are studying MMA all the time. So,
well, the hands-on I can actually handle. I teach that stuff. The running to the fight part is where I slowed down.
Oh, I know you teach the hands-on. I'll be a quick story. I remember back when we were doing personal defense TV, and you were the first person I called, and I said, I've got this new TV show. Who am I going to have on a show called Personal Defense TV? I said, we got to have Massad Ayoob on. So, but I remember we were doing a thing about you using your Kubaton, and you were telling me that you had actually taught your daughter a lot of these moves, just simple stuff. And I remember the story about her taking on the schoolyard bully and bringing him literally to his knees. Remember that?
Yes, she was 12 years old. There was a boy in school. Father of daughters, your nightmare is your 12-year-old daughter goes into middle school with a bunch of 14, 15-year-old six-footers who can't control their hormones. And this little SOB was coming up behind the freshman girls and grabbing their pants and pulling their pants down. And he had a sudden and acute failure of the victim selection process and tried the daughter, who promptly spun around, put him in a taken to Kodagai's wrist lock and applied some pain and said, "You're never going to do that anymore, are you?" And he's like, "No." "You're not going to do that to anyone, are you?" And he's like, "No." And she threw the hand back in his face, and he crawled away on his hands and knees. And I said, "Dad, I think I'm in trouble." I said, "No problem. They'll call the principal's office, look him straight in the eye. They're not used to that. Tell them I want to call my father or my attorney." So I told my secretary, hold my call for anybody but my daughter. Call my lawyer. He's like, cool, he's on board. So we're waiting for the call, sitting here, the clock ticks. Kid comes home from school at 3 o'clock, and I'm like, what? She's like, nothing. And all I can think is somewhere down in the office, if it was reported, the principal and the vice principal were just giving each other high fives.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I can tell you that that's exactly the case. My wife was a teacher, and I remember her saying that at one point, this little ruffian who was always picking on people and beating up people picked on the wrong person. This big kid just started pounding him on the schoolyard during recess. All the teachers turned their back and suddenly became busy in something else.
The educational beatdown.
There you go. There it is. Why did you decide way back then to try to start educating people about self-defense with guns?
Well, I had started carrying early. My grandfather, the first of the family to come to this country, had a chain of small businesses in Boston, Massachusetts, and multiple times needed to use his gun against armed robbers. My dad was attacked on the street by a couple of guys that tried to murder him, and he wound up shooting and killing one of them and shooting up the accomplice so bad that guy suicided a couple of years later. So when I came along mid-20th century as a surprise change of life baby, it was simply part of the lifestyle. There were going to be guns in the house. There's guns in the family jewelry store. My dad started me with a .22 rifle at age 4 and handguns at age 9. So when I started working in the store at age 12, he said, look, you know where all the guns are in here. You may not be able to reach any of them, so if you're going to work in here, you're going to carry. And the state of the law in that state at that time, and still today actually, is that you only needed a permit to carry loaded and concealed in public. So I'm 12 years old with a loaded .45 on, expected under certain circumstances to shoot adult human beings to death if I had to. Mm-hmm. I'm like, okay, kid's going to need some rules here. And one of my dad's customers was the chief of police in the city, another was a judge, a couple of lawyers. And they were kind enough to sit down with a 12-year-old kid that had an unusual problem and explained, here's what you can do, here's what you can't do, and here's where you go to find out more. And that's when I discovered legal libraries. We lived in the capital city, so we had access to the state legal library. And only later did I look back and wonder what the librarians thought about this kid, 12, 13, 14 years old, that keeps coming in to look up the laws of killing people. But I remember thinking back then, okay, wow, all this stuff I've been reading in gun magazines and, I hear around the Cracker Barrel at the gun shop. Mm-hmm. Holy crap, these people are going to get themselves sent to prison doing some of this stuff.
Yes.
Somebody ought to write a book about this. And I, honest to God, Tom, remember thinking, when I grow up, if nobody's written a book about this, maybe I will. Nobody had, and that was the genesis of the book, In the Gravest Extreme, that came out in 1980.
Mas, I was just looking at the Wayback Machine. It was 50 years ago that a fellow named Jeff Cooper bought a cattle ranch in Paulden, Arizona, and really started changing changed everything. People just don't understand. I don't think he still doesn't get enough credit for what happened before, what was before, and then what happened afterward. But you've been doing this for decades now, teaching self-defense with firearms, teaching the legal aspects of it. And I'm wondering if you could just talk about the changes you see in people, their willingness to get training, now versus when you got started in this.
Well, the public is a lot better educated now than it was then, and we have far more people carrying guns. Let's take particularly your younger listeners back in time to that 50-year mark you mentioned. Mm-hmm. 50 years ago, we had 7 states where there was absolutely no provision for the ordinary private citizen to legally carry a concealed handgun in public. Today, there are none. Every state has some permit, some provision for that. Mm-hmm. Back then, most of the states were man issue, meaning the issuing authority had carte blanche who they would grant the permit to. And while in some jurisdictions they did it fairly, in many of them, New York City, for example, or Los Angeles, it turned out to be, we'll give you the permit if you're white, male, rich, and politically connected. It was a terribly elitist thing, and it lent itself, frankly, to corruption. Today, the great majority of the states are shall issue, meaning that the issuing authority has to, by law, give you the permit or show good cause. Why not? A felony conviction, adjudicated mentally incompetent, something like that. 50 years ago, we had one state, the state of Vermont, that did not and never had required a permit to carry. You were simply forbidden to do so if you were a convicted felon, mentally adjudicated mentally incompetent, or, if I recall the words of the statute correctly, had malice in your heart. Mm-hmm. Today, Tom, we have hit halfway point. 25 states
I know.
have so-called constitutional carry. It's huge. Virtually all the states up until this year, not all, but there were only 6 or 7 that were still may issue. The Bruin decision in June by the United States Supreme Court put a stake in the heart of that corrupt, elitist, may-issue system and essentially said, if you're going to have permits, it's got to be shall issue. Now, we've certainly seen the other side fight that. New York with unreasonable requirements for training that essentially will make it unaffordable to the poor who most need this level of protection. And their stupid law, which I don't believe is going to stand, and we and everyone else are challenging, saying you can only carry in some place that has a sign expressly welcoming concealed carriers.
Let me say this, Massad. When you say we, I guess I should have pointed out you're also president of the Second Amendment Foundation.
Correct. We're litigating that as our other pro-gun groups. So we've come a long way. We have, as you said, back then there was no gun sight. If you were a private citizen and wanted to learn to shoot, there were lots of NRA instructors who would give you, firearm safety class. Would show you how to win a bullseye match. You could go to Camp Perry and take their course once a year, which was entirely on how to win a bullseye match.
Right.
Colonel Cooper opened the first fight with a handgun academy that had existed in this country since the Civil War, when they had the so-called sized as arms, the schools of arms down around New Orleans, where the rich young gentlemen would go to learn to win a duel.
Uh-huh.
And that has burgeoned now. We have more high-quality firearms training than ever around the country. My school, Massad Ayoob Group, teaches all over the country, and many other highly qualified instructors do. We have far more people carrying guns today, not only because of the improvement in the law, but 2020, that perfect storm of the pandemic, the riots, people watching live on television as the police were ordered to stand back and let cities burn. And they made it clear that, look, the police are not going to be able to protect you. There are 800,000 cops to cover a nation of 330 million people. Do the math. Mm-hmm. It's estimated that since then, over 10 million new gun owners have joined our ranks, virtually all of them motivated by self-defense, home protection, and that sort of thing. So I think overall we've made some great strides. This thing is really a culture war as far as the legislation goes and the lawfare, as it were. But by and large, we are winning. The Supreme Court is on our side because our side is simply the side of logic, fighting the side of empty emotion.
And I would add that those 10 million new gun owners, an awful lot of them don't look like what they always portray us as, the old white guys. We are diverse, we are women, we are young, we are all over the place, we're LGBTQ everywhere. So it's a reflection of what America looks like. Two things, I guess, pop into mind, let you riff on that. One is that a lot of people think they're already trained up because they've been around guns all their life, and it's the old, you don't know what you don't know. And the other is, okay, so if you had to say, this is what I think you ought to be thinking about doing in the coming year if you're serious about self-defense with guns, give us your advice.
I'd recommend two books. My own Deadly Force book from Gun Digest Publications, and Attorney Andrew Branca's excellent book, Law of Self-Defense, from lawofselfdefense.com, or you can get either of them from Amazon. Mm-hmm. Check with your gun shop to see who they recommend as competent instructors in your area for a concealed carry. Get the training. Trying to reinvent the wheel yourself is tedious. It takes forever, and it's real easy to make mistakes that you ingrain and then have to, heal the training scars, as we call them. Mm-hmm. Getting training at the beginning is the shortcut to competency. Learn it from someone who's already made all the mistakes so you don't have to. Stay practiced with the gun. If you can't get to the range regularly, dry fire, that is practicing with the empty gun with the muzzle pointed in a safe direction. And we have technology today, the SIRT pistols that shoot laser beams, the Mantis X device that we're big fans of here that you can hook up to your iPhone or your computer, and in dry fire, without firing a single live round, get feedback on your speed of fire, your accuracy of fire, and all of that. It's a perishable skill. Drawing and firing a gun is a complex skill, meaning it's a chain of events where each element has to be done correctly, or like one link chain breaks, the whole chain breaks. Mm-hmm. Same deal here. Stay practiced with it. Focus above all on safety. You may or may not ever have to draw that gun on a criminal, but you're going to be carrying it every day of life. And sometimes when you're distracted, you're exhausted, in the presence of the people you most love, in the presence of the people you bought that gun to protect. So safety is the overriding concern. The thing is a lethal weapon.
Right, and I would throw into this, if you have not taken a real self-defense class, you simply don't know what you don't know. And then, I mean, I know you get this all the time. People take your class and they go, wow. And you hear this all the time. I had no idea. It's just because they've never been exposed to it. And if you don't have that background, if you don't have that training, then you're practicing the wrong things. So you got to start with really good training. And I'm just going to do this shout out. I would recommend anybody who can go take a class from you. You know, you're teaching this and it goes around the country, right?
We do. Our website is MassadAyoobGroup.com. We have classes in the four corners of the continental United States and in the heartland. And we're pretty much accessible to anybody who's willing to drive a few hours or take a short plane flight.
Right. For those who are trying to figure out how to spell that, it's MassadAyoob, MassadAyoobGroup.com. Mas, thank you so much for spending some time with us, looking back and then projecting forward. I think we are looking at some really good advances, and we're going to have a good year when it comes to gun rights.
I am looking forward to that as well, Tom. Thank you so much for all that you do to spread the truth. And I wish a happy new year to you, your family, your team, and all your listeners.
Thank you, my friend. You take care. I know you will. All right, Ed. Massad Ayoob, like I say, he's my go-to guy.